Hey everyone, this is Chris Olivas with another episode of The Setup, and in this episode, I want to walk you through how to edit your very first Milky Way photograph or astrophotography. I'm trying to make this video in 5 minutes or less, walk you through the basics of Photoshop, the small adjustments that you need to do in order to make your image pop. As part of this video, I'll also include a link to some raw files so that you can go ahead and try editing alongside with me and have some fun. Alright, so here we go. We're going to try to do a Milky Way edit in 5 minutes. Let the timer begin. Alright, so I've got here an image of the serpent sculpture in Borrego Springs, California. This was taken at one of my workshops fairly recently. If you're interested in joining any of my workshops to learn the basics of astrophotography, you can go ahead and visit my website, www.cholivas.com. Got workshops going on all summer long, and this is the best place to learn astrophotography. It's amazing subjects. It's a dark sky area, and as you can see, the Milky Way pops. So this image was taken with my Sony a7S III and Sigma 20mm f1.4 art lens, and this image was taken with an exposure time of 15 seconds, an ISO of 6400, and shot at f1.4. I composed this shot to really balance everything out. We've got the serpent here with its kind of leading lines pointing us to the Milky Way. It's far enough away from the town where there's very little light pollution. So when I'm editing, some of the first things that I do in Lightroom is I want to test to see the actual optics. I want to actually enable a little lens correction, because sometimes lenses, depending on your lens and your camera model, you might have a little bit of some, like fisheye or like some weird vignetting. So let's see if we've got our lens profile. Good, I can select it now. Here we go. So this was a Sigma 20mm lens, f1.4 art lens. So I'm going to go ahead and select that profile. And as you can see, it kind of like fixed the little fisheye. After I do a little lens correction, the first thing that I like to do is actually play with the auto settings of Lightroom. I just kind of like to see where it goes, where it takes us, and obviously it really overcooked this image. So I like to tone things back. I'm kind of the person, I don't really like a blank canvas. So I'm going to tone, first of all, the exposure. I'm really looking at this histogram here. I want to make sure there's no highlights that are blowing out the image. So I have a little arrow here to help me with that. I want to increase the contrast, kind of spread out so it's those lights and those darks. This already brought down the highlights, which is great. I'm going to play with that a little bit later, so I'm going to leave that there. The shadows were brought up nicely. I'm actually going to bring it down. Normally I do want a lot of like detail in the foreground. As you can see, this serpent's really beautiful red at night and a lot of detail, but it's so silhouetted that I think that I'm okay with it not being super broad, the shadows being super brought up. So I'm going to just bring it so you can subtly see the little redness of the metal, but not blow out and get all noisy, all the shadows. I'm going to bring down a little bit of the whites. We're going to play with that a little bit later, and actually bring down just a little bit of the blacks, I'm not going to play with that much. Next thing I want to do is play with the tonal curve. I'm really going to just add a slight little S curve to give it that kind of like natural, film feel. And as you can see with the curve, just with these highlights, it's so subtle, you could see the core of the Milky Way start to pop a little bit. So I'm just going to do that just on the very highlights and the darks just ever so slightly, just kind of even this out just to get that like kind of spillover. And I'm pretty happy with that. So temperature hasn't looked too bad. It's not too warm, not too cool. A little bit on the magenta side, I would say. So I'm just actually going to bring that a little bit slightly to the green. And I'm just going to test out if I move this a little bit, so I move that temperature a little bit too warm. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit to the blue zone. Honestly, I think the temperature looks pretty good. It's a little bit magenta, and we actually do have some little air glow, which is kind of cool. So I'm only just going to bring it just slightly cool. There we go. Cooled it down just a little bit. I'm not going to play too much with the vibrance. The saturation is really going to exaggerate some of those colors. So sometimes I like to bump it all the way up so I could see if it's a little too warm or too cool. We have a little bit of some warm colors over here, a little bit of some cool colors over here. It's not too bad. So I'm actually going to leave the saturation where it is, maybe bump just a tiny bit. Not going to touch any of these adjustments just yet, maybe some effects at the end. I'm going to do one final adjustment, and this is a little bit of some fine tuning. I'm going to take the brush. What this does is it creates a mask so I can do some adjustments specifically to a part of the image. So I'm going to do this right here, the Milky Way core. And so I'm just going to kind of go through the same adjustments. I'm actually going to bump the exposure just a little bit, more so the contrast, the highlights. I don't want to overdo it. You could see that we have some really bright ones here, but I'm going to actually really bring those shadows down so that we could have some major contrast in some of the different like dark clouds of the Milky Way. I'm not going to touch the whites too much or the blacks because I just want this one point to work. That looks pretty good. Finally, well, not finally, almost finally, I'm going to go back to my optics and I'm going to do a little bit of some lens vignetting. I'm going to kind of bring the vignette down. I'm going to bring it up a little bit. It's kind of vignetting in the corners a little bit. Be sure to do this only in the optics section and not in the effects section. You could add a vignette effect right here. But that look, you can see it really overcooks it. It's just kind of a flat effect. So I don't like to do that. Sharpening, I think, is looking pretty good. The very final thing I'm going to do is noise reduction. So you could actually do this manually if you don't have the latest version of Lightroom, but I like to use the new AI denoise version, which is available on Lightroom. It's pretty awesome. So I'm going to click that. It's going to do a little bit of thinking, a little bit of cooking, and it's going to clean up some of that noise. Yes, we're just going to go with the default setting. Sure, let's go. And it's going to go ahead and work that through. All right, so we're back now, and we've got our final edit. We've got our final image right here and the original raw image. You could see just some subtleties, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of some exposure, a little bit of pop. That was Milky Way editing in 5 minutes. If you would like to learn more or get a one-on-one editing session, you could visit my website at www.cholivas.com or find me on Instagram at cholivas. I do one-on-one sessions for an hour or so. I also run Milky Way workshops where you could actually go through and visit this awesome sculpture site, and we can learn the basics of astrophotography from composition to exposure and then back over here into the editing room. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you have some fun chasing those stars. If you want to try your hand at editing this yourself, I included a link to the raw image of this in the comments.